This is the environment that I grew up in. It was quite a different time. You can see from these magazine covers. Those of you who are adults my age, you will remember this time. Everything was about trade wars. Everything was about the trade deficit. Everything was about Japan being a threat to the United States. So this was the environment that I grew up in when I was in high school. Along with that, when I was in college, after I graduated from college, my very first job after college was with an American company. We made this device called a compressor, a piece of equipment. I don't want to go into the technical details, but this was a revolutionary design of an air conditioning compressor that this company had made. I worked for this company, and I was in the international department, and my role was to sell this revolutionary compressor into the Japanese market. And don't forget, we're living in this time when Japan is perceived as a threat. And so we had this revolutionary compressor. We were trying to sell it into these leading companies of Japan. You see their names right up here on the screen. And it was really difficult. It was not good enough for us to have a revolutionary product. Japanese engineers acknowledged that this product was amazing. And it's very hard to impress Japanese engineers. Nevertheless, that was not enough. Through my relationship, my sales relationship with these Japanese companies, I realized that these Japanese companies wanted to make sure such things as they wanted to make sure that we had quality control measures in place at our manufacturing facilities. As an American company, we didn't really have a good concept of quality control. We had to learn this from Japan. They also expected the outward appearance of this product to look perfect. They expected the packaging to look perfect. Now, the American concept of packaging is that if it arrives at the destination with a bunch of bumps, the packaging has done its role. The Japanese perspective on packaging is even the packaging should be perfect. There should not be a scratch on the package as it arrives into the port in Japan. We had to learn these things. It was a very painful lesson for us as an American company to learn these types of things, but we needed to go through that process in order to be competitive. This same process that we were experiencing in my company in Ohio, at this time was going across the United States. American companies were going through this very same process, and I lived it. But I can imagine that at this time, the American companies were struggling very much in order to be able to compete on the world market. But it was a process that we had to go through in order for our country, at least for our business world, to survive. Therefore, 25 years ago, when I was a high school student, when I was a college student, I would say that as far as our relationship, the United States was in a position where we had to learn from Japan in order to survive. And now I'd like to contrast that to how I feel the relationship is today. This is an interesting chart. It's a chart that everyone in Japan knows very well. It is a chart that shows the population of the Japanese population declining. It started at they can actually pinpoint the year. It was actually in 2005 that the Japanese population started to decline. Now this is very unusual. There are other countries such as Italy, the Ukraine, and other countries that have a population decline, but none as severe as Japan. And different people feel differently about the severity or the danger of this situation. But for me, it's a very scary chart. Because once you lose your young population, at least in the United States, it's the young people that drives the economy, right? It's also the young people who are going to be able to pay for the retirees in a country. And for me, this is a very alarming chart. But what I would like to say about this chart is that this is a symptom of many tremendous social challenges that are going on in Japan. So for example, I don't want to go into too much detail because I'm not an expert on these issues, but young men and women in Japan are no longer marrying each other. And even if they do marry each other, they're choosing not to have kids. Those parents who do have kids are sending their kids into a Japanese education system that's very stressful. Now, the Japanese education system has always been stressful, but now, because the economy is so poor, there isn't a guarantee of jobs at the end of that process. And so we have different social problems in Japan, such as bullying. We have a high suicide rate in Japan. There's I almost said bizarre, but it's a very unfortunate situation that I wrote about in the Oregonian recently about young men, some who are children, who are locking themselves up into their bedrooms for months and years at a time, and completely withdrawing from Japanese society. And so these are some very severe social problems and challenges that the country of Japan is facing. my district is undermining me. So what I would like to say about today is that I feel that today, Japan, the United States and Japan are in a different role right now. It's my opinion, but I feel like Japan needs to learn from the United States in this situation. It's very easy to say, but I feel like Japan needs to implement more policies that show a balance between family life and company life. Because of the stress that exists on children and their parents, I feel like they should do more to preserve the innocence of childhood. And of course, we would always like to have a situation or a society where they tolerate differences. It's much easier said than done, and it's not that the Japanese are not trying. But I think some of these American values would really be helpful to Japan going forward. The next part of my speech, I'd like to talk a little bit about my identity as a Japanese American. It's a journey over time that encompasses from childhood all the way up to today. This is pretty much sums up my feelings about being Japanese when I was a small child. I remember I lived in New Jersey, I grew up in Utah, I grew up in Kentucky. Oddly enough though, no matter what playground I went to, no matter what state it was, kids knew this rhyme. Chinese, Japanese, dirty knees. Mama, mama, look at these, and they would pull their shirts out like this. And it was very demeaning to me. And it's one of those powerful memories that has stayed with me all my life. And it was interesting because even before the internet, there must have been some magical network where kids from New Jersey communicated with kids from Utah. Because I heard this rhyme growing up every playground that I went to. So as a child, I was very embarrassed about being Japanese. I was very ashamed about being Japanese. But then came my high school years, and it was around this time that Japan started to emerge as a powerful country. It wasn't necessarily that I became proud of being a Japanese, but after years and years and years of being made fun of and picked on for having black hair, for having thin eyes, for being short, for having a weird name, all these things, and suddenly now in the news you see that the Japanese school system is respected in the whole world as one of the best. You can see the electronics industry, the car industry, all these things. Japan was suddenly becoming a leader. Even my college textbooks started adopting Japanese terms like kaizen, kanban. These are Japanese concepts that started to make their way into the American college system. And so this filled me with some amount of pride. You can understand after being made fun of for so long as a child. And now that Japan was being strong, it gave me a sense of, wow, I'm a Japanese. And so during this phase of my life, I feel like I identified more as a Japanese than I did as an American. In my last year of college, my thinking took another turn. It was around this time that the Persian Gulf War started. And this was my first exposure to war. My generation has not experienced war. And I saw on the news the bodies of young American men and women coming back to the United States. Their names were being read on the nightly news on a daily basis. Around the same time, a man named H. Ross Perot gave a speech at the university that I went to. And in that speech, it was very interesting. I'll never forget it. He looked at all of us and said, you know, you guys are sitting comfortably here at Georgetown University. You're very intelligent. You have a good life. You have a good future in front of you. But what about the young people that are fighting in the Middle East right now? Don't you feel like they have the same types of dreams that you do? And yet, they are sacrificing their lives, their future, their families, their husbands and wives, while you're here comfortably studying in a comfortable institution. And so these types of things really had an impact on me. And it was around this time that I suddenly became proud to be an American. The picture of the compressor down there represents the first company that I worked for out of college. I wanted to work for an American company at this stage. I really wanted to show that American companies could do well, even though Japan was powerful. These first 4 cars, the very first 4 cars I owned as a youngster were American. I made it a big deal that I wanted to buy an American car even though I was a Japanese person. So I wanted to show those people who are around me that I'm just as much of an American as you are. And so during this phase I was very patriotic as far as my American citizenship and my American background.